Chapter 21 of Angel Food for Jack and Jill, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 21 The Girl in the Shabby Dress. Little Ethel Clark wanted to make her first communion. Every day she studied her catechism and said her prayers, and very often the little girl visited Jesus in the church. Ethel longed for the day when she would receive Jesus for the first time. You can imagine how excited Ethel was the day the priest called the names of the children for the First Communion class. Yes, Ethel's name was called, and she was so happy that she ran all the way home to tell the good news to her mother. Ethel's mother, however, was not so happy. "You're only 7, and you're too young to make your First Communion," said the mother to the little girl. "Besides, we haven't money enough to buy you new clothes. No, Ethel, you can't make your First Communion this year." Ethel's heart was broken. She couldn't make her First Communion. Oh, how the little girl cried! But tears wouldn't make the mother change her mind. She was determined that Ethel would not make her First Communion. Of course, Ethel was disappointed, and Jesus was disappointed too. Jesus wanted to come to Ethel, but the girl's mother said that Jesus would have to wait. Well, Ethel didn't give up. Oh, no! She prayed and prayed and prayed. And Ethel did something more. Every afternoon she went to the First Communion class. Even though Ethel wasn't going to make her First Communion, the girl wanted to learn about Jesus. Now, Ethel never told the priest or the sisters that her mother didn't want her to make her First Communion. So the day before First Communion Day, when the children went to confession, Ethel went to confession too. Of course, after confession the girl was very happy. But she knew that the next day she would be very sad. All the other little girls would wear white dresses and white veils, but Ethel would have no white dress, no white veil. All the other children in the class would receive Jesus for the first time. They would make their First Communion. But Ethel would have to wait. She would have to wait until she was older. Then, maybe, her parents could buy her a white dress. The next morning St. Clement's Church was crowded with parents and friends who came to see the children make their First Communion. The First Communion class sat in the center aisle, the boys wearing white shirts and white ties, the girls wearing white dresses and white veils. I said that the First Communion class sat in the center aisle. Yes, that's right. The children were all there, all except one little girl, and that little girl was Ethel Clark. Ethel sat in the side aisle, wearing a shabby blue dress and her sister's hat. Ethel tried to pray, and she tried to forget about the children in the center aisle. But it was too hard. Ethel wanted Jesus. She wanted Jesus so much. Ethel wanted to make her First Communion. Ethel watched the boys as they marched to the altar rail. She saw each one of them receive Jesus for the first time. Then she watched the girls. Rosemary Statt, Helen Connors, Judy Barker, Mary O'Grady, Susie Dale. Well, when Ethel saw Susie Dale kneeling at the rail, her heart pounded within her. Ethel should have been kneeling next to Susie Dale. When Susie Dale received Holy Communion, Ethel became so excited that she stood up and called at the top of her voice, "I want little Jesus! I want Jesus too!" The priest was so surprised that he stopped for a moment. Then he motioned to Ethel to come up to the rail. And what do you think? Ethel Clark hurried up to the rail, knelt next to Susie Dale, and received Holy Communion. Yes, Ethel Clark made her First Communion in her shabby blue dress and her sister's hat. Now, I don't have to tell you that Ethel was happy that morning. Even though the girl didn't have a new dress, Jesus loved her just as much as the other children in that First Communion class. Ethel's soul was clean, and her heart was filled with love, and that's all that counted with Jesus. Why, I don't suppose that Jesus even noticed the shabby blue dress. He looked at the girl's soul and saw it was right. That's why Jesus made Ethel so happy. Boys and girls, I wish that more of you were like Ethel Clark. You should want Jesus just as much as Ethel did. Jesus is God, you know, and He can do much for you. That's why you should want Him. That's why you should receive Him often in Holy Communion. Why, if you have no mortal sins on your soul, you can receive Jesus every day. I know you all love Jesus, but why don't you show your love by receiving Jesus often? Jesus wants you, and you should want Him. You need Jesus. You need His graces. Children, you must save your own soul. No one else can save your soul for you. You must do it yourself. Every time you receive Holy Communion, you receive Jesus, and you receive graces that help you save your soul. Don't neglect Jesus, and don't neglect His graces. Receive Holy Communion often. End of chapter 21.